Beef. Beef is a type of red meat that comes from cattle, which were first domesticated around 10,000 years ago. This meat is incredibly diverse within itself, because the taste and texture depends on where the cut comes from on the animal. The tenderloin, which sits along the spine and does almost no work, is extraordinarily soft and mild. The chuck from the shoulder area is loaded with connective tissue and fat, and is tough when cooked quickly, but becomes deeply rich and almost silky when braised slowly for hours. The brisket from the chest is one of the toughest cuts on the animal, but also breaks apart when it's been smoked for 12 to 18 hours. The flavor largely relies on the intramuscular fat, or marbling. The more fine white fat streaks running through the muscle, the richer, juicier, and more flavorful the meat. Angus cattle are famous for producing consistently well-marbled beef and are the dominant commercial breed in the United States and much of the world. Wagyu cattle are specialized Japanese beef cattle breeds known for producing intensely marbled, tender, and healthy meat. Lean beef offers high-quality protein, heme iron, and vitamin B12 for energy and brain health. It also provides zinc and B vitamins that support immunity and metabolism. Camel. Camels were domesticated in the Arabian Peninsula around 3000 BCE, primarily for transportation and their ability to survive the desert conditions, but also as a source of meat. The meat itself is usually dark red and relatively lean. Compared to beef, camel meat has a slightly stronger and sweeter flavor. Some people describe it as tasting somewhere between beef and lamb. Young camels under 2 years old are considered the premium option and have much more delicate flavor. The texture is similar to beef, firm but with decent tenderness in the right cuts. The hump is a reservoir of fat. That fat, when cooked, renders down and is prized in many cultures as a delicacy on its own. It has a rich, slightly neutral flavor and was historically used both as a food and as a cooking fat. In some parts of the Middle East today, hump meat cooked over fire is considered the finest part of the animal. It's often served during large celebrations or weddings, and there are also dishes like camel burgers and camel stews. Interestingly, camel meat is sometimes considered healthier than beef because it tends to have less fat and cholesterol. Elk. Elk is one of the largest members of the deer family, and its meat was an important food source for indigenous peoples for thousands of years. A bull elk can weigh over 700 pounds, meaning a single animal provides an enormous amount of meat. Historically, communal elk hunts were significant events, and the meat was dried into jerky or pemmican for winter storage. Almost nothing from the animal was wasted. Today, elk is consumed in two main forms: wild harvested elk, which hunters take during designated seasons in places like Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado, and farm-raised elk, which is now a growing industry, particularly in New Zealand, Canada, and parts of the US. Wild elk is leaner and has a more pronounced earthy, slightly gamey flavor. Farm-raised elk tends to be milder and slightly more consistent in texture. The flavor of elk meat is often described as richer and more complex than beef, with a clean, sweet, almost herbal taste that reflects the animal's wild diet of grasses, sedges, and bark. The meat is a deep, dark red, much darker than beef, which comes from a higher concentration of myoglobin, the protein that stores oxygen in muscle tissue. A serving of elk has about a third of the fat of a comparable serving of beef, which makes it popular among people focused on high-protein, low-fat eating. In Scandinavia, the European elk, called moose in North America, holds a similar cultural significance, and moose meat is a big part of the diet in rural Scandinavian communities. Cooking elk requires extreme precision, because it lacks fat to buffer against heat, and can turn tough and rubbery if you cook it too long. Most chefs suggest quickly searing it over high heat, then letting it rest so the inside stays medium rare. Pork. Pork comes from pigs and is the most widely consumed meat animal on the planet. Pigs have played a big role in human history because they are extremely efficient animals that can eat almost anything that comes from plants or animals and turn it into high-quality protein. During the colonization of North America, pigs became one of the main sources of meat. Farmers often just let them loose in the forests where the pigs would find their own food. They survived easily and reproduced very quickly without much human help. Because of this, pig populations grew fast, and by the 1630s, there were huge numbers of pigs in places like Massachusetts and Connecticut. Pork itself, the muscle meat, has a mild, slightly sweet flavor that is notably more neutral than beef or lamb. Pork absorbs marinades, spices, and smoke very well, which is part of why it appears in so many cuisines. Pork fat, specifically lard, was the dominant cooking fat in the Western world before vegetable oils. Lard has a high smoke point and adds a richness to pastry and fried food that is very difficult to replicate. Different parts of the pig produce very different textures. Pork belly is extremely fatty and rich, while pork loin is lean and tender. Cuts like shoulder contain more connective tissue and are great for slow cooking. Yak. The yak is a long-haired cattle species native to the Himalayan region and the Tibetan Plateau. They have bigger hearts and lungs than normal cattle and many more red blood cells, which helps them get enough oxygen in the thin mountain air. People in Tibet have raised and depended on yaks for thousands of years. Yak meat is dark red, lean, and has a flavor that many people describe as sweeter and cleaner than beef. It's commonly used in stews, dumplings, and stir-fried dishes in Tibetan and Nepalese cuisine. Yak meat also contains more iron, protein, and omega-3 fats than beef, while having less fat overall. In Tibetan Buddhism, yaks are respected animals that represent strength and purity. And in mountain communities, the meat is often dried into jerky, so families can store food and survive the long winters. Lobster. Lobsters were so abundant along the coast of New England in the colonial era that they would wash up on beaches in enormous piles after storms. They were so common and associated with poverty that in some areas, servants and prisoners reportedly negotiated limits on how often they could be forced to eat lobster. It was food for the desperate, and even used as fertilizer. Only after railroad expansion allowed fresh lobster to be shipped inland to wealthy urban diners who never ate it, the reputation of lobsters increased, and by the late 1800s, lobster was becoming an expensive item. Lobster meat is structurally unlike any other seafood. The tail, which is the main muscle used for the animal's propulsion through water, is firm and dense, with a slight snap when you bite through it. The claw meat is softer, sweeter, and often considered the best part. The knuckle meat connecting the claw to the body is somewhere in between, tender with a slightly briny sweetness. When cooked properly, lobster becomes delicate and buttery. It's commonly boiled, steamed, grilled, or served with melted butter. Lobsters are usually cooked alive because after a lobster dies, enzymes in its body quickly start breaking down the meat, which can make it spoil very fast. But several European countries have moved toward requiring stunning before cooking, since recent years of research suggests lobsters have more complex nervous systems than was previously assumed. Frog legs. Archaeological evidence from sites in France suggests frog consumption going back over 10,000 years. Frogs are found on nearly every continent. They're abundant in and around water sources, and they're an easy catch. Frog legs are a traditional delicacy in several cuisines, especially French and Chinese. The meat itself is white, mildly flavored, and tender. The most common comparison is to chicken, particularly chicken wings in terms of texture, but much more delicate. It's more subtle than chicken and takes on the flavor of whatever it's cooked with. The texture is slightly firmer than fish, but not as dense as chicken breast. Most of the frog legs sold in European and North American markets are imported from Asia, primarily Indonesia and Vietnam, where they're farmed and wild harvested in enormous quantities. Frog legs are usually lightly battered and fried, or sautéed with garlic and butter. In France, the dish called cuisse de grenouille has been eaten for centuries. Wagyu. Wagyu means Japanese cow in Japanese. Wa means Japanese, Gyu means cow. The term refers to 4 specific Japanese breeds: Japanese black, Japanese brown, Japanese polled, and Japanese shorthorn. Wagyu beef, especially from the Japanese black, is often considered the most luxurious meat in the world due to its high quality and intense network of fat inside the muscle. The isolated development of these Japanese cow breeds, combined with extraordinarily rigorous selective breeding and unique feeding programs, produced animals with a genetic predisposition for extreme intramuscular fat deposition that is found nowhere else in the world. The fat doesn't just streak through the muscle in occasional threads, it weaves through every millimeter of the meat in a dense, intricate web that makes the cut look almost white in some cases. This fat has a melting point lower than human body temperature, which means it literally melts on your tongue when you eat it. The texture is soft, almost creamy. The flavor is intensely buttery and rich with a depth that builds slowly. It's almost too rich to eat in large quantities. Premium Wagyu is typically served in small portions, 3 to 5 ounces. Japan grades Wagyu using yield and quantity scores, which look at marbling, color, firmness, and fat. The highest rating, A5, requires perfect marks in all categories, with marbling scores reaching up to 12 in some regions. Kobe beef comes from Tajima strain Japanese black cattle in Hyogo Prefecture, and must meet strict rules to earn the name. Australian Wagyu and American Wagyu exist as well, using genetics from Japanese black cattle crossbred with Angus or other breeds. Full-blood Australian Wagyu can even rival Japanese Wagyu, but they are still slightly different and experienced tasters can tell. Chicken. More chickens are processed globally per year than any other animal by a huge margin. It's the default protein of the modern world, and appears in more cuisines, more kitchens, and more everyday meals than anything else. Chickens were domesticated from red jungle fowl in Southeast Asia roughly 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, likely for cockfighting and ritual purposes. After World War II, commercial chickens were engineered to grow incredibly fast. Today, some chickens can reach the size needed for meat in just 35 days, while older traditional breeds took 12 to 16 weeks. Factory chicken, especially the breast, is very bland. It's mostly just plain meat that works better with sauces and seasonings than on its own. This happened because as breeders made the breasts bigger, the real taste of the chicken got lost. Heritage breeds like breasts from France, often called the best chicken in the world by chefs, are raised in the Ain region under strict rules, and the meat has a really rich flavor and a nice texture. It costs about 3 to 5 times more than a regular supermarket chicken. Ostrich. The ostrich is the largest living bird in the world. Despite being a bird, ostrich meat looks and tastes more like red meat. Commercial ostrich farming began in South Africa in the early 19th century, initially driven not by meat, but by feathers. Ostrich feathers were among the most fashionable accessories in Victorian and Edwardian Europe, and the farms of the Oudtshoorn region in South Africa became very profitable catering to that demand. When the fashion for feathers collapsed around World War I, farmers pivoted toward the leather and then gradually the meat. Today, South Africa is still the world's largest ostrich producer. The meat has a deep red color with a fine-grained texture and a lean profile similar to a very lean beef cut. The flavor is slightly sweet, without any of the gamey or strong flavors associated with duck or other dark meat birds. It has significantly less fat than beef, and the fat it does have is disproportionately in unsaturated forms. It also has high iron content and a similar protein density to beef, which has made it a premium red meat alternative. Ostrich meat is also super tender. Its muscle fibers are smaller and have less connective tissue than beef, so it's easy to digest. Kangaroo. Kangaroos have been a food source for Aboriginal Australians for at least 50,000 years, which makes it one of the oldest continuously consumed meats in human history. Wild kangaroos are harvested, not farmed. They roam freely across their natural range, eat native vegetation, require no land clearing, produce minimal methane compared to ruminants like cattle and sheep, and have hooves that don't compact and damage soil the way cattle do. The harvest is managed under a national code of practice and is considered one of the most tightly regulated wild meat industries in the world. The meat has a flavor that is distinctly gamey in a way that is pleasant rather than overwhelming. It's richer and more minerally than beef, with a slight earthiness that reflects the wild diet. Because it's so lean, kangaroos have almost no intramuscular fat. Kangaroo tail is also eaten, traditionally slow-cooked in stews and soups by both Aboriginal communities and early settlers. It's fattier than the main muscle cuts and becomes extremely rich and gelatinous when braised for a long time. Iberico pork. Iberico is often called the Wagyu of pork, and is thought to be the best pork in the world. This meat comes from the black Iberian pig, which has roamed the forests of the Iberian Peninsula for over 12,000 years. These pigs have a unique genetic ability to store intramuscular fat, creating a ruby red meat that looks more like steak than conventional pork. The top grade is belota, or acorn-fed. During the Montanera season, the pigs roam freely in oak forests and can eat up to 10 kilograms of acorns a day. This acorn diet gives the meat a nutty, slightly sweet flavor and a buttery texture. The fat in Iberico pork melts at room temperature because it's high in healthy monosaturated fats. That makes it super tasty and a bit healthier than regular pork. It's packed with umami and, when aged, develops a rich, wine-like depth of flavor. The whole system is tightly regulated with a label color system, Black Label being the highest, indicating 100% Iberico breed pigs raised entirely on acorns. A leg of a top-grade Iberico ham can cost several $100s. Whale. While most of Western Europe and America avoid eating whale meat today, it has a long history as a survival food in Norway, Iceland, and Japan. In Japan, whales were an important and cheap source of protein after World War II when the country was very poor. Industrial whaling fleets nearly drove multiple whale species to extinction and drastically depleted nearly all populations before the International Whaling Commission instituted a global ban on commercial whaling in 1986. Whale meat is dark red and looks more like beef or venison than fish. It's packed with omega-3s like DHA and EPA and has very little cholesterol. It's often said to taste like a mix of beef and liver. It has a strong, gamey flavor but doesn't taste fishy if cooked the right way. Today, 3 countries continue whaling under different frameworks. Norway objects to the ban and conducts commercial whaling of minke whales in the North Atlantic. Iceland has periodically resumed commercial whaling, and Japan hunts whales under a scientific research exemption that is widely criticized, though it officially restarted commercial whaling of certain species in its territorial waters in 2019. Indigenous subsistence whaling by Inuit and several other groups is separately permitted and regulated. Whales have demonstrated exceptionally complex cognition and social structures, which makes their hunting highly controversial and still widely debated. Bison. The meat of the American bison is often described as outstanding or beefier than beef. Bison has a richer, deeper, slightly sweeter flavor than beef with a clean finish of minimal gaminess. The color is very dark red, even darker than beef, with a dense grain. Like ostrich and elk, bison is very lean, significantly leaner than commercial beef, which makes it cook faster and should be handled with care to avoid drying out. Bison burgers are often said to be better than beef burgers, and ground bison has a richer, slightly sweeter taste than ground beef and browns differently in a pan due to the lower fat content. Bison steaks, particularly ribeye and tenderloin equivalents, are very good and increasingly available at quality butchers across North America. Bisons are the biggest land animals in North America, and were a main food source for the indigenous peoples of the plains. Octopus. Octopus, also called pulpo, is a staple in Mediterranean and Asian coastal cuisines, especially in Japan, South Korea, Spain, and Portugal. Raw octopus is extraordinarily tough due to a very high collagen content and dense muscle structure. The traditional method for dealing with this along the Greek coast involves beating the octopus against rocks repeatedly to break down the muscle fibers, which Mediterranean fishermen did and still do. Tenderizing before cooking is essential. Modern cooks have various techniques: freezing and thawing, slow poaching in their own juices under pressure, or the Spanish method of blanching octopus 3 times in boiling water before finishing. When properly cooked, it becomes tender but with a gentle chew and a slight firmness. The flavor is clean and oceanic, mildly sweet, with a depth that is distinct from fish or shrimp. It has a slight mineral quality that comes from its diet of crustaceans, mollusks, and small fish. The harvesting of octopuses is controversial because they show signs of very high intelligence. Studies have found that they use tools, solve problems, have unique personalities, and may even play. Their brains include microRNAs linked to smart behavior, similar to mammals. Because of this, many researchers argue that octopuses deserve better welfare. In 2022, the UK recognized this by officially declaring octopuses sentient beings and giving them legal protections. Despite the debates, it's still eaten in many coastal regions around the world.